Okay, the recording has started, and this is the March 3rd, 2020 Crossplane community meeting. So on our monthly release frequency, we are now working towards a release of v0.9. That'll be the first conversation topic for today. So we released 0.8 in the middle of last month, so it's been about 2 weeks, half a month since that release, so we're pretty much in the middle of the release cycle. We've just started a new sprint just yesterday, and a 2-week sprint. So that will take us to the end of the sprint is Friday, March 13th. So I'm proposing one possibility here is that we could finish the sprint and have that be the feature freeze day. And then we could, do some quality assurance and some stabilization stuff. And then sometime in the afternoon, maybe on Monday, the March 16th, we could run the release for 0.9. That's open for discussion and simply just a suggestion or a proposal. We can certainly move things around as needed, but that's basically the middle of the month, like the typical frequency we've been having. We could push, that's open for discussion if anybody has any thoughts on that. We do have a 0.9 milestone open, and I've been trying to add issues to them. We've already got some that are fixed, and we've got some that are still open, but I've been adding, at least in the core Crossplane repo, to the 0.9 milestone. And then Phil has updated the roadmap, and that has been merged. Phil, do you want to talk through a couple of the big roadmap items here?
Yeah, sure. So we're continuing to work on incorporating the versioning and upgrade design feedback that Marcus is working on as part of 1160. So if you have a chance, give that a look. We did rename the GitHub org, so thanks to Hashdan and Jared for the merges and approvals and stuff on that. So now you can get it at GitHub/Crossplane instead of Crossplane.io. So that's super exciting. And we have some really great stuff coming down the pipe with some experimental support for OM API types in Crossplane, which basically add just a small handful of API types for app configs, including workloads and traits and those types of things. So that's coming down the pipe. And we basically have our templating engine support for both Customize and Helm now added in, so you can easily create a stack that basically whether it be an application or whether it be like an environmental config stack, that we've been ported over, for example, stack minimal GCP, minimal AWS, and minimal Azure, using this mechanism, using Customize. So it's a great way to kind of see how you can create these ready to run environments that are parameterizable through CRDs, so that you can kind of customize like what region it's going to go in and make sure it gets set up with the right provider credentials and things like that. So that's super exciting. Now it's also actually used to port over the WordPress application that can deploy on top of these minimal stacks. And so the 0.8 blog post actually walks through that from the CLI for WordPress on top of minimal GCP. And so the AWS and Azure ones got added in this 0.9 release. And then the other awesome thing that so if you just want to really quick, so if you just kind of scroll down a little bit in the top header there, minimal environment stacks for GCP, AWS, and Azure. And so it just kind of walks you through step by step the commands you need to run, and some of the YAML, and then also the resultant resources that get created. And then we actually have WordPress up and running on top of that in literally no time flat. So super exciting to see all that come together and get additional cloud support for that in 0.9. And of course, installing things from public Docker hubs, great, but if you want to install things from a private repo, you're going to need some credentials to go along with that. So we're going to be upgrading the Stack Manager to allow you to set a token there that can be used for accessing private repos. And then there's just a ton of really awesome release process and efficiency improvements that are also coming down the pipe. So a pretty action-packed 0.9, and looking forward to that in a couple of weeks from now. So thanks, Jared.
Cool, thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. Yeah, so if anybody has feedback on the release suggestions or proposal for the timing, then we can take that offline and discuss like in Slack or get more community feedback on it. So that's 0.9 stuff. We can go ahead and proceed on to the community topics section here. So the first one we have here is always an update on the latest TBS episodes. So TBS 11 ran last week, and Dan, do you want to talk about that pretty cool episode?
Sure. So we had one of the maintainers from Cluster API on, Jason, and basically what we did was use Cluster API to spin up a Kubernetes cluster on AWS. So not using a managed Kubernetes service, but bootstrapping your own using kubeadmin. It was pretty cool because we actually were the first demonstration and documentation of the V1 Alpha 3 release of their API types, which had some pretty major changes and brought a lot of new functionality. So it was cool to see that. So essentially what we did was spin up a new cluster and then create a Kubernetes target with the kubeconfig information for that cluster, and then scheduled resources to that cluster using Crossplane. So in the control cluster, we had Crossplane installed and Cluster API installed. And so you basically get out of the box that kind of like manual Kubernetes offering, as well as the managed service offerings that Kubernetes or that Crossplane provides. So we don't spin up like EC2 instances and then bootstrap them with Kubernetes for you, although you could do that. But they kind of like package it up into some nice API types. So especially if you're already using that, it's really useful to be able to bootstrap new clusters with that. So a lot of cool work going on over there, and it was nice to kind of collaborate with some of the upstream Kubernetes folks to show that off.
Sweet, Dan. And do you already have an idea about TBS 12, or is that still in the works?
I have an idea, but I am not going to share because it's not confirmed yet.
All right, fair enough. We will wait to see what the next exciting episode brings us. Cool. All right, then we had a couple updates about the open application model and integration with Crossplane. Phil already touched on some of those in the roadmap update that he gave, but also of note here is that in the upstream OHM spec, the NIC's proposal to make the experience in the API a little bit more in line with Kubernetes practices has been merged and accepted upstream. So that's pretty good to see that progress there. Like as a community, the OHM is adopting some of the ideas that the NIC was driving there. And then NIC just last night within Crossplane opened up a pull request that will that extends Crossplane with knowledge and understanding of some of the OHM core types, like application configuration and traits and workloads and stuff like that. And he also wrote a controller that will be able to reconcile an application configuration object from the OHM spec and reconcile it into various workloads and traits and things like that that could be further reconciled into concrete instances of objects. So this integration and support of OHM types and spec, by the Crossplane community is making really good progress. So it's really awesome to see that work from Nick there. So thank you to Nick. And then Dan, you're also working on an implementation of workload scheduling stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that too?
Yeah, sure. So the work that Nick has done basically takes the most end user or highest level user of Crossplane and OAM, which would be like an application owner or maybe even someone less technical than that, and basically allows them to use a catalog of different components that have been defined and that sort of thing. And then that gets translated down the line to a couple of different resources. So that application configuration controller implements right now the core workload types, which is only one, the containerized workload, which is pretty similar to a Kubernetes deployment. And then it also allows you to use the core traits defined there. So a trait basically modifies the way a workload is created, or it adds something to it. So in the in a containerized workload or something like that, it may add, an ingress to it, or, a number of replicas on the deployment that's translated into, or something like that. So all of these are kind of more abstract concepts that eventually get translated down into core Kubernetes types. And so the main part that I'm working on, and then some folks over at Alibaba, who I don't think are on the call right now, but Ryan Zhang is working on local Kubernetes story, and I'm working on the remote Kubernetes story. So in the local case, you can translate directly to Kubernetes objects. So, a deployment in this case that's running in the control cluster where Crossplane would be running. In the remote Kubernetes case, we have to take all of the resources, potentially a deployment, a service, ingress, etc. So we take the containerized workload that's produced by Nix controller and any traits produced by it, and we bring it together, package it up into a Kubernetes application, then schedule that to a remote cluster or a target cluster. So there's kind of like two different avenues there. And the nice thing is, because Crossplane is built in this way and we have this extensibility model, we're able to work on those two things simultaneously. So we should have a pretty good story for that and some good demos coming pretty soon.
Awesome, Dan. And so, just for my own edification, real quick, between the Kubernetes local and Kubernetes remote implementations there, those controllers, they will, were you saying that the Kubernetes remote one is essentially the same exact things that would be deployed to the, or created, the artifacts that would be created by the Kubernetes local implementation, but just bundled up in a Kubernetes application that can get scheduled remotely? So the same underlying objects that get scheduled to a cluster, but one is bundled up with the, the wrapper to get it remote, right? Propagated remotely.
Yep, that's right. And there's a couple different things you have to do with that if you think about, injecting secrets and that sort of thing. So there is some like kind of custom logic around doing that. But yes, essentially you end up with the same Kubernetes native types in one location or the other.
Cool, awesome. That's good to know. And then there's not like much divergence in the implementation necessarily, or expectations. Excuse me. Awesome. Cool. So good updates on the OHM integration and collaboration work there. Then we also had a community. We wanted to post this question to the community. We are planning on investing some more in the supported services for our different cloud provider stacks or providers. So we will, like AWS is one that we want to invest in as well. So we are kind of curious what the community thinks about what are important AWS services that we're using and getting value from, that the people would want to see implemented and support for in Crossplane. There are already a number of services implemented and supported in Crossplane for AWS, but in terms of what are the ones that people really care about, we're soliciting feedback on this issue here, and I think we should tweet this as well to get better reach about it, so that we can get more eyes on it and get more responses to it. So let's take an action item to tweet that if we haven't already. All right, so if there aren't any other topics for the community section, then we can move ahead to the PRs section. And Dan, it looks like you added a couple of PRs here to discuss. So let's bring those up now. Yep, and so I'd seen this one, Dan. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this one, and then also, especially in reference to like your testing that had been done on it to make sure that everything is continued to be parsed by any different implementations of the stack parsers that may be out there?
Yep, for sure. So the reason why this came up is we have two different types of the same kind, but they're in different groups inside GCP. So that would be the GKE clusters. So right now what's happening is when they all go into the same directory, we're getting the same resource manifest applied and icons, etc., applied to both the compute version and the container version, which is, they're pretty much the same thing. It's not a huge issue, except for that it then categorizes in any parsing system it's going to categorize the container one into the compute one because that's the category on the resource manifest. So essentially what this does is just modifies the bash command a little bit to copy into specific directories. And, you know, it's possible, this is a very small case, but it's possible in the future we could have more conflicts. So we'd probably want to move towards this, towards doing this across the board. And as long as you know, parse this in the same way that the stack manager does. So I've actually created this and made sure that the annotations on the CRDs that are created match the resources that are in the directory with that CRD. And you can test doing it that way. So as long as any parsing implementation follows that same logic, then it should work fine.
Awesome. And the for the GKE cluster CRDs that are in two different groups, in the container group and in the compute group, did the annotations you can apply to them, are they different across the two, or are they like pretty much the exact same?
They're very similar. The only difference is the group category is actually defined on the .resource.yaml. So if you parsed the container gcp.crossplane.io, it was showing up in the compute group. They were both showing up as CRDs that were installed, and they were installed successfully, but the container one was showing up in compute. So once again, a very, very minor issue in this case, but it's nice to fix it.
Yeah, cool. Let me see what's next here, the next pull request. Like somebody rang the doorbell, the dog's like freaking out.
Yeah, I added this one too, so I can go ahead.
Yeah, you want to talk through this one?
Yeah. All right, so this is a PR from Sahil. So I just wanted to surface this one. There's some really great work here, and I think it's useful for any new contributors because Sahil is kind of coming to this without previous knowledge, just using the docs and that sort of thing. And then we've had some good back and forth in the reviews and comments that I think could be useful across the board. And so he did a great job actually of getting this implemented before even the first review. So there wasn't that many changes, but the small changes are probably the ones that most new contributors are going to run into. So I just wanted to add it to the notes and reference it for anyone who is looking to get started on this kind of work of either updating resources or implementing new ones, and kind of seeing some of the gotchas that can get you while you're doing so. But yeah, and also just give Sahil a shout out because he's gotten this very quickly, something that's taken you know, months of doing this every day for us to kind of grok and understand. And it was also some nice affirmation of some of our documentation. So we're going to continue to refine that and build on that from experiences like this. But pointing to actual implementations is a lot of times more useful for new contributors.
And then Dan, is this so it's nice that we had this feedback and kind of you know, moving this effort along with a new contributor and fixing some of those first time common mistakes. Do we also have those well captured in the developer contributor guides so that you know, people, like it's in a more permanent fixture that people would go to as opposed to just in an old PR?
Yep. So Muvafik and I have been working through, it's actually an open PR right now on Crossplane, a V1 Beta 1 checklist, which is meant to kind of synthesize some of the work that he did in the managed resource API standards that we have. And just having it in a checklist form makes it a lot easier to both review and kind of like make sure you've done everything, because the API doc is more of a paragraph form and a little bit more conceptual. So yes, we're definitely trying to capture those things. And as we have more experiences like this, hopefully we can continue to build on that and update it. Yeah, it's the V1 Beta 1 quality, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome to have that document there to be, you know, an easy to grok, you know, checklist sort of format for people to be able to, you know, get the support and make sure that they're figuring out, like, you know, it's easy to figure out exactly what they need to do to be in order to be a high quality and, you know, conformance implementation. Perfect. That's great. All right. And then I think there was one more PR to bring up as well.
Yeah, I guess I kind of hogged the PR section, but this is an update that Muvafiq actually brought this to my attention last week. So since the implementation of the Kubernetes application as a kind of packaging method for deploying resources to target clusters, it originally was a cluster ref, and that was in the status. And then when it was changed to target ref, when Kubernetes target was implemented, that was also in the status. So the issue with that is that if that value gets set based on scheduling, and then we lose the target ref, or we lose the status, then we could have issues with that being scheduled somewhere else, which we don't want. And just based on the labels, if there's multiple targets that have those labels. And also these controllers are a little bit old, and the API types weren't using sub-resource status, which actually was helping us not lose the target ref because the spec and stats are being stored together instead of separately. But this kind of updates those controllers to a bit more modern of a pattern, also starts using sub-resource status, and moves the target ref into the spec. As a byproduct of that, you can also actually directly reference a Kubernetes target that you want to schedule to. So previously you could only schedule by labels, and now you could, actually put a direct reference to a Kubernetes target in your namespace and say, go to that cluster.
Well, yeah, I like these the updates to the usability and the standards of this. That's awesome, Dan.
For sure.
Sweet. Okay, I think that's all the agenda items we had here. So I'll open the floor for any other topics that anybody may want to bring up now. But if there are not other topics, then we can adjourn early here and get 30 minutes back. Okay, then let's go ahead and adjourn. And thank you for another lovely community meeting, and we will see you all online.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared.
See ya.